So thank you everyone for the great presentations. It's really been very inspiring to hear what the future of retina can look like. Hopefully we will be spoiled for choice. But when we're spoiled for choice, as you know, come a lot of difficult decisions. And we have our esteemed panel here who will help guide us through some of the decision making that we're going to need to make as clinicians. So sustained drug delivery, obviously that's a very broad category, as we've seen. On the other spectrum, at the extreme, is really monthly intravitreal injections. And then we have some technologies that are somewhere in the middle. So with sustained drug delivery, Maria, what kind of patient are you thinking about when you're going to start entering these discussions?
Well, I think that monthly injections, although they have been very effective and they have been very lucrative, they're really unsustainable. And there's a number of patients that we don't think about that lose vision because they cannot be coming in. The very elderly with AMD, I see that in my practice, the ones who start getting non-ambulatory or become bedridden, many of those patients become centrally blind, and their quality of life, not being able to watch TV or read, is really something we don't think about. So I think that group of patients, the very elderly, the ones that start getting infirm, that get a hospitalization, or their health wanes, or they just can't come in, those are ideal patients. The diabetics, we know that up to 50% of patients with diabetic retinopathy miss appointments, and they do because they're working age. They cannot take time off. They have other commitments. So I would say those two cohorts are ideal for more sustained delivery systems. Whether it is once every 6 months or once a year would be ideal. There are still patients who may want to come every month. I have patients who love coming monthly because it's their only outing. They're very elderly and they can talk to people. But I think we have to tailor our treatments to the reality of the patients, and that is something we often do not think enough about because we're all rushed and we have too many patients.
Thank you, Maria. So Bob, on that note, Maria said, often we are rushed. We have a lot of patients. Switching therapies takes a lot of time, right? A lot of discussion time. Patients need to go back and think about it. There are prior authorizations, etc. When is your pivot point to switch from the regular anti-VEGF therapies, for example, or other monthly therapies, to something of a more sustained delivery?
Well, I think that you're absolutely right. It does take time to explain a change. And people who are doing well with their current therapy, they are resistant to change. And yet the frequent flyers, as I call them, the people that need monthly injections with whatever they're on, they're more inclined to change. They're more inclined to try something new because, as Maria said, it's sort of unsustainable. These monthly injections are quite a burden, even though I have some patients that sort of like to come in for their social outing, but mostly quite a minority. But I think that the people that require the very frequent injections, and you may not even be able to completely flatten them, those are the people that I will first change to a new therapy, whether it's PDS or when something is available in the intravitreal injection realm that we just saw, or even gene therapy. The people that are hard to treat and are not responsive as well as you'd like them to be, or just have been seen monthly for a long, long time, those are the ones that we put in the trials now oftentimes, but those are the ones that are just anxious for change. And so they're a no-brainer. They're the easiest to start with and then get an idea of how the new therapy works.
Great. Thank you, Bob. And Sharon, as you know and as you've seen here, there are some sustained delivery devices that require a surgical procedure in the operating room. For example, placing that initial port. And there are others that are injectable, in an outpatient setting. Where do you think patient acceptance will lie, and also physician desire to do one versus the other?
So I think most of us refer to unmet need as the burden of coming into the clinic every month and that taking time and so forth. I think we're missing a point here in that the unmet need is a bit wider than this. One, because it's absolutely the patient, but it's also the caregiver, it's also the physician and the chair time. And these are aspects that are being constantly deliberated in an industry setting more than in a clinician settings, but have to be taken into consideration. Other involve psychological barriers, right? Not everybody's really happy to get a needle stuck into his eye on a monthly basis. And so this has to be a part of the unmet need that drug delivery is actually tackling. So the less invasive, the reduced applications of it all go into the same bucket of answering the unmet need. And I think these should not be overcome. And in that respect, I may want to kind of talk a little bit about enhancing or broadening the blanket that's called drug delivery, because we've heard today that there are many aspects of it. It's not, first of all, it's not only drug. There's gene therapy, there's cell therapy. And so delivery is a major obstacle, is a major unmet need that we're tackling, and is very specific and highlighted in the eye. The second thing is beyond just what's under the lamp here, and that's the patient unmet need. We also have to take into considerations other unmet needs there.
Great, thank you. So Maria, when we talk about, sustained, the word sustained, what does it mean to you? Does it mean 6 months, 12 months, 5 years? And does that number vary depending on how complex the procedure is or the side effect profile?
Yes, we don't really have a definition for what sustained delivery is. We know that it's more than 1 or 2 months because that's what we're getting with many of the anti-VEGFs that we're injecting in the office. But ideally, I think most of us would feel comfortable with 6 months, ideally a year. More than a year would be great, but we don't really know the long-term effects of maybe, all the agents that can suppress for longer. And I think depending on the procedure, you see, if we're going to be taking someone to the operating room, but the procedure requires that we follow them up closely, then the benefit is not necessarily that great. Whereas if we have, let's say, an erodible injection or maybe a suprachoroidal injection that we don't really need to follow them up, that may not raise the IOP, that we can just see them, once every 6 months, that would be ideal. So I think with what is great about, being here is that we see all of the options that we're going to have. We're going to have all sorts of options. We will have patients that may not mind going to the OR, to get gene therapy. And the advantages of that is that maybe they get, sustained release for 10 years, which, may be a game changer, maybe in diabetics, in younger diabetics. Or we may get, an in-office procedure that can give us a year or 6 months. And so it is a very exciting time to be doing this. And thank you all the companies for really putting all the effort into providing us with so many options.
So talking about options, I think one thing we've seen is that within a certain class of medication, there are more and more options. So let's take steroids, for example. We already have at least 2 sustained delivery steroids that are on the market, totally available for us to use. But now we've heard about even more, and some of them are the exact same drug, perhaps formulated differently, perhaps delivered differently, maybe even, in a different dose. So Bob, let's say you've decided you're going to treat your diabetic patient with a steroid, okay? How do you decide which steroid, which dose, and which delivery device?
Well, for me to switch to steroids, I usually start with anti-VEGF for, say, diabetic macular edema, because I think the side effect profile is less. And so, but they don't respond as well as they do to, say, vein occlusion or AMD. So let's say this patient is not responding as well, and I'm ready to make the shift to steroids. I tend to start with the Ozurdex first because it's a shorter duration, and I don't want to induce glaucoma or something like that by using a longer term steroid like Iluvien right off the bat. If the Ozurdex itself seems to work, and then I decide that yes, this addition or change to steroids is beneficial, then I would go to the more long-acting agent.
So Bob, you're absolutely right. And I think that's the way that most of us practice today. But given what we've heard about the newer steroids, perhaps, for example, a low-dose dexamethasone or a suprachoroidal delivery that may not have these traditional side effects, such as cataract progression and intraocular pressure elevation, would that cause a paradigm shift in your mind to perhaps start with steroid first?
I think it could if indeed we don't see cataract progression or glaucoma. I mean, it's early. We don't have the long-term follow-up yet from these new agents, but it's clear that diabetes has a separate mechanism than just anti-VEGF. I look at RVO and think this is almost completely, responsive to anti-VEGF. But that's not the case with DME. There's an inflammatory component of some sort or other pathways that are not completely covered by anti-VEGF. And steroids cover a lot of those other pathways in my experience. And they, it's something I would prefer to use were it not for the side effect profile. So if indeed these new agents can minimize or eliminate those safety concerns, I think I would shift to first line with them for diabetes.
Maria, Sharon, any other comments on that?
Yes.
I mean, we're talking now different algorithms for treatment potentially.
Yes, I agree with Bob. I really like steroids for diabetics, especially very severe diabetics. We know that they have so many inflammatory cytokines at play here, and the steroids are really effective. But, many of these diabetics are very young, fairly young. They have their lenses. They're not like AMD patients. So we do worry about, cataract progression is an issue and steroid response, which can be up to 30% of patients. So, oftentimes I do like Bob. I start them with anti-VEGFs and then I'm pretty quick to add steroids, but that is another conversation about, you will be getting a cataract and you may have to use drops and we may have to follow you more closely. So that all adds to the treatment burden. So a steroid that would not cause either of those two would be the ideal steroid.
So let me ask you, Maria and Bob, then, what about TKI inhibitors? What about axitinib?
I'm sorry?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
What about axitinib?
I'm very excited. Just the data we just saw that and with Clearside, they're showing some improvement in vision over well-treated patients. Makes me think this additional coverage of pan-VEGF inhibition, it may have some benefit from a visual standpoint. We've seen it with other agents that just address that directly, but it's encouraging. And also the fact that like the EyePoint drug was used systemically and had a nice clinical proven benefit. It's just the side effects that were the problem. I'm very excited about this whole pathway, this whole new pathway that it's such a short half-life without a sustained delivery device. It's not really, something we can inject into the eye. But these companies we've seen, plus others, Ocular Therapeutics is working on one as well. I think this will be a very exciting new adjunct to our treatment because of what we've seen already.
Well, I mean, thank you so much. I mean, really going back to, being spoiled for choice, hopefully one day, and having to guide clinicians, on what might be the best drug at the right time. And the key, I think, is at the right time, because we've seen that different diseases go through different phases of maturity. Can you see more cat-like studies emerging? I mean, there could be endless permutations, but do you think we're one and done now with the cat trial? Or does this open up, a whole new arena for comparative trials?
I know Dan Martin very well, and he's, looking to use the DRCR-Net type network to do the next cat trial. And he's torn with what is going to be in clinical practice in a few years from now. Will it be faricimab? Will it be the PDS? Will it be, what needs to be tested a few years in the future? And so I do think there'll be another cat-like trial, but I don't think they've decided exactly what our near future holds to figure
I guess it's
out
how much
best to test
time and
things.
money do we have, right?
Yeah,
So great. Now, what about payers? What about the healthcare landscape? I mean, Bob, I know you have personal experience here, shifting to a new model of employment or healthcare delivery, whatever you'd like to call it. What are you seeing? I mean, potentially we could have 20 to 30 different agents approved with different mechanisms, right? Different delivery devices. And, employers, hospitals, academic centers may come to us and say, listen, guys, this is ridiculous. Just make a choice, pick 5 things for the formulary. What are you going to have?
Whoever has the best lobbying group in DC.
I think this is another unmet need that has to be taken into consideration very early on. And so as more formularies are becoming available, there's a need both to formulate a protocol of what's going to be a first line, second line, third line, as well as this whole arena becoming more price sensitive and maybe changing the paradigm. And instead of having you in the clinic stashing up on anti-VEGFs by default, but doing something else in return.
Well, competition brings down prices. So, the more options we have, the lower the prices will have to be, because it will be a competitive arena. And I think, like Charlie said before in the panel, I think just having algorithms for the different stages of the disease, I think is very useful. You see that in diabetics. It's very different, a type 2, a type 1, one that has renal disease too. There's all of these, nuances. And I think that is where all the different options will be very useful to just target different stages of different, diseases.
I mean, right now, with very few options, in general, I think, if a patient comes in with wet AMD, they're going to be offered one of a few choices, and we think pretty similarly. Obviously, step therapy is something that's been imposed on us as well. Most of us do treat and extend. But let's say we had 30 different options. Could you see the front door being very different if you go to Dr. Barakal's practice or Dr. Avery's practice or anyone else's practice, for example?
I'm afraid to postulate that the insurance carriers will dictate a lot of our first-line choices and our formulary, and I feel it's going to be a problem. Just look at biosimilars coming. If one insurance company insists you use this biosimilar and another one that, I hate to think it's going to be like that. We may be having multiple variants of just ranibizumab to store in our fridges. It's going to be very frustrating at a logistical standpoint, and also to cover, to know all the nuances that are going to be thrust upon us from an insurance side. That's not exciting, but it is really exciting to have multiple new agents coming to be better able to treat our patients. But I think you will see most of the changes being dictated by insurance more so than one practice versus the other. And sometimes you only have so much room in your refrigerator. You may, in your particular region, most of your patients are in this health plan. You may have just one agent for those people to start with instead of 3 or 5 or whatever. And so it may vary because of, I think, mostly insurance dictates more so than personal preference.
Thank you. So hopefully let's just advocate for more retina specialists to work much more closely with insurance companies so that we can convince them of the value of choice and the value that every patient is indeed different. Well, I just want to thank our esteemed panelists. Thank you, Maria, Sharon, and Bob. And thank you so much to all the companies who presented not only in this session, but today as well. Thank you.
Thank you.